Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the M. Weiner Foundation of New Jersey, the Thomas and Teresa Malarkey Foundation, the Open Society Institute, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, the William T. Grant Foundation, and from the corporate community, Rhoda Finn. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and our subject today derives from the truism that most of us in America, and now perhaps in significant parts of the world outside as well, have two businesses, our own and show business. Well, this program relates to the latter, particularly to the insights into movies the world over provided by a brilliantly readable Alfred A. Knopf book entitled Movies and Money by Lord David Puttnam, Britain's peerless filmmaker who has brought us such magnificent cinema wonders as Chariots of Fire, The Killing Fields, The Mission, and Midnight Express. Now, I actually came to know my guest during the 20 years I was chair of the motion picture industry's voluntary film rating system, and I think one of the last times I saw him was when we had dinner together while I went on at great length about what a daring, though what I thought was a perfectly foolhardy decision he had just made to become chairman and chief executive officer of Columbia Pictures, one of Hollywood's major studios, and itself then owned by CocaCola. What I didn't know then was that David Puttnam had already delivered to Coke's chieftains what he calls his own screed. Namely, movies are powerful, good or bad. They tinker around inside your brain. They steal up on you in the darkness of the cinema to inform or confirm social attitudes. They can help create a healthy, informed, concerned, and inquisitive society, or alternatively, a negative, apathetic, ignorant one, merely a short step away from nihilism. Also, writes Lord Puttnam, the medium is too powerful and too important an influence on the way we live, the way we see ourselves, to be left solely to the tyranny of the box office or reduced to the sum of the lowest denominator of public taste. Well, I think you won't be surprised if I note that 2 years later, the new CEO was gone. Tinseltown's and our own very great loss, it's always seemed to me, though now I have the opportunity to ask my guests why in the world he ever dreamed that the mixture of movies and money could result otherwise. Lord Puttnam?
Well, Dick, I mean, first of all, clearly you were more knowledgeable and more prescient than I was on the day I decided to take the job. But there is a history to this. I'd had an extraordinary run of movies. And as I walked down the steps of the Palais in Cannes, having just won the Palme d'Or with The Mission, my wife quite very sensibly turned to me and said, well, what next? I said, well, how do you mean? She said, well, and it's true, I had always wanted to win the Palme d'Or. I'd been the British representative at Cannes 9 times. I think this is a record. They always owed it me. And she said, it's dangerous. You're going to start just getting into a situation of competing with yourself, and film X won't be as successful as film Y, and your time to move on. And the idea of moving on was quite a frightening one. And at almost exactly that moment, I had this offer from CocaCola. And the terms in which the offer was framed and the extremely decent man who conveyed the offer, Faye Vincent, in one respect made it irresistible. But I did go to Atlanta. I did actually write that and give it to them because I didn't want to say it, because I figured if I said it, it would vanish into the ether. Whereas at least if I'd written it and made them all sit there and read it, they couldn't pretend otherwise.
And here it is in the book.
And here it is in the book. And they signed off on that. I mean, more than signed off on it. I have to say that the late Roberto Goizueta, who was always very good to me, and his partner, Don Quijo, enthused and were excited by that vision. They said that's what they wanted. They pointed out that the Columbia division of Coca-Cola was minuscule, and I remember very well their argument was they wanted films that they could possibly be proud of. They wanted films they could take their families to, and they felt they'd owned a studio for a long time of which that wasn't true. So the brief was to deliver a studio, a Rolls-Royce studio if you like, that made a different type of product, and if it happened to make money, great. If it happened to lose a bit of money, the sense I was very clearly given was that Coca-Cola Company could more than afford it.
But it couldn't be, could it?
In hindsight, no. But I think they believed it when they said it to me, and I chose to believe them.
Right.
In a way, we were co-conspirators in an enthusiastic piece of idiocy.
Well, I remember Fay Vincent's devotion to you, and he thought it was going to be a wonderful combination. But when we come here to this rather extraordinary book, because Movies and Money, it seems to me, the combination is disastrous.
Fire and ice.
Right, precisely. Why could you make it go then? Why does there have to be the assumption that in this country, at any rate, it's fire and ice?
First of all, I made a number of misjudgments. One was I should have done what Jeffrey Katzenberg did when he went to Disney, which was ignore the pleas of the distribution people that they didn't have any product to pump through the system until a point where I believed there was sufficient product, or I had things that were worth pumping through the system. Instead of which, I think there's always been a little bit of a Boy Scout in me who sort of saluted and said, right, product. And I dashed out, and instead of, I think, concentrating on films I absolutely believed in, I started trying to make the best of what we had available to us. And some cases, pickups, some of them I'm actually very proud of. Hope and Glory was a pickup. The Last Emperor was a pickup. So in fact, the picking up we did wasn't so dusty. More worrying were the films that we put into production that either shouldn't have been put into production or in most cases weren't ready to go into production. I say Jeffrey, I think, was smart. He had a strategy and he waited. Unfortunately, I didn't have his example at that point to look at. I also think that I had a number of views about what was wrong, not one of which I think in essence was wrong. But I think what I did forget was that I spoke with a foreign accent. And I think, fun enough, if anyone asked me, well, no, what was the most stupid thing you did at Columbia? It was forgetting that I was not an American, and that people are extremely tolerant, or can be very tolerant, if they hear constructive criticism in their own language. They don't take it well when they hear it from a foreigner.
And yet you write here about the universality of film.
I believe in the universality of film, but I also believe in the specificity of criticism. I think if you hear a critique about an industry that you quite clearly know more about than the rest of the world, and you hear that critique in a foreign language, it's not attractive and it isn't likely to be persuasive. And I think that it was the only dumb thing I did.
Well, I won't comment on that. But
I'm glad of that, because there probably were other dumb things I did. But
well, dumb thing, I'd never say that to you. Well, I did at that dinner.
Yep.
But there seems to me, in Movies and Money, to be a kind of inevitability, on the one hand, that inevitably we are going to produce this kind of system in this kind of country, talking about the United States. At the same time, you take this wonderful vision that you have of what film, cinema can be, could be, what it meant in your life growing up.
I think that's the key.
Why?
I know, I mean, there are things people can't take away from your life. And one of those things is your own personal trajectory, your own personal experience. I'm sitting here with you today, as much as anything else, because of a group of filmmakers who were making movies in the 1950s that I saw as a kid in North London, and which altered me, which gave me a set of ethical parameters, a type of person I wanted to be, a notion of the type of contribution I'd like to make. And now, admittedly, it was a different world. It was a post-war world. It was a world that was searching for a different form of meaning. It was a world that had survived what looked like a total catastrophe. It was a world where it looked as though right was overcoming wrong. And so I was the joyful, gleeful student, if you like, of people like William Wyler, Fred Zinnemann, Stanley Kramer, who had a very, very, I think, firm ethical grasp on where society could go and should go. And I was the beneficiary of that. And all I've tried to do in my career, is nudge that along, is somehow to replicate those notions, those thoughts. I think it's true. I'd like to think that you can't come out of Chariots of Fire without an affirmed vision of what a human potential is. You can't come out of Local Hero without a stronger sense of the value of community. You can't come out of The Killing Fields without a firmer commitment to the notion of friendship. So, in my own way, nothing like Willie and Fred and those other heroes of mine, I think I haven't done badly.
Then what happened? I don't mean in terms of your career, in terms of your choice, because your career is made up of those very wonderful films. What happened to the movies that the films that inspired you don't prevail? One finds them occasionally, but they don't prevail.
Well, the answer, Dick, and it's slightly glib, and I know it as I'm saying it, is that at some point the studios, people who make decisions about making movies, lost faith in the audience, and simultaneously the audience lost faith in cinema. And they both, I use that phrase, reduced the lowest common denominator. I think that's what exactly happened. The studios decided to reduce their product to the lowest common denominator of public taste, and the public, instead of rising up and saying, hang on a second, we're smarter than that, decided to accept cinema as something less in their lives. That's, I think, the most important thing. Cinema is a very important thing in my life. It's an important thing for some people living here in New York who seek out movies, who discuss movies. But for most people in the United States, and indeed for most people around the world, movies have become exactly the same as the stuff that you stick in your mouth when you're watching them. They're just a visual version of popcorn. They're comfort food.
Well, let me go back to the question, though, of cause and effect here. What led to this? Who stepped forward first, or who stepped backwards first? The studios or the audience, in your estimation?
I think the studios went into free fall in the 70s. Before I was just beginning to make films in England, but I think there was a pretty catastrophic period in the very early 70s where the managements lost control, where I think the managements were too old, out of touch, and where they weren't able to nurture the new audience with anything that was going to really work. You then had this extraordinary flurry of quite wonderful films, very much when you were in Hollywood, Raging Bull, Godfather 2. I mean, there was a brilliant patch of marvelous American films. But what they'd lost at that point, and I don't want to say I'm preachy because I was accused this week of being preachy, and I don't feel I'm being preachy, but I think what they lost, and what the individual filmmakers lost, was their moral compass. I think it's actually true of my generation in the 60s. We had lots of wonderful ideas and an enormous amount of energy, but I do think we were floundering around looking for a moral compass. We knew that the 50s Nixonian moral compass was wrong, but and so we set about destroying that. But whilst destroying it, I don't think we put anything particularly substantial in its place.
You know, I want to find out about what the preachiness was that you referred to now, but I first want to ask you whether this isn't, in a sense, the same conversation we had at that dinner, just as you became chairman and CEO of Columbia Pictures.
Can I say, in one respect, it
Sure.
is, because I remain an optimist. I was an optimist at that dinner that night.
I know.
Needed. And I'm an optimist sitting here at this table today, despite the fact that in many respects things look more bleak than they did even in '86.
But David, if you're talking about an institution, you describe this institution in Movies and Money. Here they come together. Mm-hmm. And there seems to me to be almost an inevitability in what the product of their coming together is. You still don't feel that way, do you?
No. It's the word I'm having a problem with, is your use of the word inevitability. I don't think there's any inevitability about this at all. I think the great sadness for me, particularly in respect to the United States, and I say this as someone, I think I've made this very clear in the book, America to me was the land of wonder. I knew I lived in a difficult country, a country going through a difficult time in the 50s and 60s in Britain, particularly the 50s. And America was the answer, appeared to be the answer, appeared to have the answers. It appeared to have a set of values, it appeared to be about something and going somewhere. So I'm very disappointed in the United States. one of the reasons I'm disappointed is I don't think any decisions in the last 20 years have been made as to what type of society this really wants to be. There's been dozens of speeches made every single time there's an election. Whoever the presidents-elect or the would-be presidents are will make almost exactly the same speech about the type of nation they wish to lead. But when it really comes to it, I don't think this country has fully decided what it wants to be. And it's a schizophrenic country. And I believe personally that particular form of schizophrenia is very, very damaging. I still believe in this country, and I still believe if it could get back to its roots and to what it's really about, it could be an extraordinary moral force.
But let's take movies. When you describe in this book, to a fare thee well, the beginnings of this industry, I wouldn't say profession, of this industry, the point is that it was initially and is and remains an industry. And when you talk in those terms, I can't find in your book any documentation for the notion that it began as a revelation of what could be done with this new art form. It began, as you say yourself, with a group of men who knew how to merchandise and produced product that they could sell, and there never was any other motivation. When you refer to the films that created your values or that helped mold you, you're talking about exceptions, aren't you, to a rule that you describe as dominating this industry from the word go?
Well, I say, first of all, they didn't feel like exceptions, because I was an avid cinema goer. I went to sometimes even 3 times a week. And whilst there were exceptional films, you know, the Happiest Days of Your Life, the absolutely exceptional films, Here to Eternity, Inherit the Wind, which had an extraordinarily powerful impact on me as a movie. Whilst I suppose they were exceptions intellectually or in terms of their intelligence, the tone, and I use this word moral with a very small m, the tone, the moral tone of the films was not dissimilar. There was a kind of, in the end, they were about good overcoming evil. And not always in a silly way, sometimes in an extremely complicated way. I've read a great deal about the conversations that took place around, when you know much more about this than me, the decision about how Public Enemy would end. Well, Public Enemy is a very, very exciting, beautifully made gangster movie. But no one ever had any doubt that the end had to be him riddled with bullets in the gutter. I don't think there was ever a serious suggestion that it would be an acceptable ending if he was off to Miami with his trunk, with a car trunk full of money and 2 very attractive girls at his side. That debate never occurred. You knew that Public Enemy had to end with a guy in a gutter apologizing to his mother, as it were.
Do you think, well, not as it were.
Well, I mean, in reality.
Do you think that the moral tone of this country, of the world, indeed, because you talk about the impact of American films around the world, do you think that we were liberated from the fact that, you're quite correct, there was no discussion of that, but we turned to a kind of realistic cinema that had no use for, had no place for that kind of automatic ending? Do you think we're better off for that?
I was always very impressed by the ending of The Graduate. If you really look at the end of The Graduate, it is not a happy ending. It is a what now?
Yeah, it's a question mark.
It's a big question mark. I think that's my idea of a moral ending. It hasn't resolved anything. And it's offered a really interesting question mark, if you choose to watch it through to the end. That is to say, if you watch that shot, Mike Nichols held that shot a long time. To me, we're in danger here of overcomplicating this issue. The issue is very, very simple. Every single filmmaker, man or woman, set designer, production designer, screenwriter, producer, director, when they go to work in the morning, enters a society, lives within a society. And they leave behind their kids who go to school and that's in society, their wives operate within the society, their parents operate within the society. To walk into a soundstage and create something or produce something which in any way, shape or form damages the stability or the sense of security or the sense of optimism in that society is, I think, an antisocial act. And I don't know how you do it. I know that I consciously trawled through all the films, certainly post-Midnight Express, and largely as a result of Midnight Express, every one of those scripts, thinking, what's the takeaway from this? What values am I leaving in place here? What am I actually saying? What's the film going to be saying? And really, really trying to create a movie which made everything else in my life more sensible. And this is what I don't understand. I don't understand people who function in an industry knowing that the result of some of their actions is a kind of takeaway for a society that is damaged. And I'm afraid, I go further, that an awful lot of those people believe that the answer to that question mark is to build a rather higher wall around their estate, to put razor wire around it, to hire a 24-hour guard, and that is the way in which they've dealt with the problem they've created. Well, that is deeply antisocial.
Well, we're into December 1998 now, and I wonder, was this the message? Was this the preaching that you did in Hollywood in the past couple of days?
Yes, but I think it's also the message I've been preaching in a way for the last 20 years. What upsets me is to be accused of preaching. It really does, it stings me. It's because what I realized is just using the word values irritates people. It irritates people because it creates a question mark in their own minds, because they know they're supposed to have values. And they know actually they have got values, but they also know that they're shortchanging themselves and their own values a lot of the time. And that's why people get irritated by the word.
David, I wonder whether the people you're talking about don't adhere precisely to the values that they have accepted, values that put number one, second part of your title, movies and money. Movies, you would call it England and around the rest of the world, cinema. For us, they're movies. And we talk about money too. The important part of this equation is that movies are designed to make money, not to uplift, not to support the kinds of values that you're addressing yourself to, not to be educational, not to be parenting and nurturing.
But why should these be ideas in opposition?
Ah, okay. That's where I go back to that Last Supper that we had.
It almost was.
Indeed. You wonder why, and within the context of the values of this country, values that are not brand new in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, make for this equation. What you were delighted with the enthusiasm and the optimism of the movies that you saw back when you were a boy,
yep,
growing up, along with that went a kind of Darwinian marketplace basis for just about everything we do. I don't like that as the principal value, and you don't either. But why, I won't say fight against it, why fail to realize it? It is the value.
Okay, there is a reason. Because ultimately, we are all searching for, and this is as much true of corporate America as it is true of any individual in Europe, we are all searching eventually for a sustainable society, sustainable businesses, sustainable world. I think sustainable is a terribly important word in this context. One of the very interesting drifts the last 3 or 4 years in this country is that large corporations are beginning to understand that if you are successful, if you make profit at the price of social cohesion, you're dealing in a zero-sum game. And this is what I'm trying to get across, I hope, to the movie industry, that the best thing the movie industry can do for itself is to start thinking more carefully about the kind of films it makes, in order to actually provoke and provide for a society which is going to be there for them in the end. I actually think the audience, sooner or later, will get fed up with the movies that are being made. I think that what I've just described as the popcorn syndrome will eventually run itself into the ground, as indeed it did in the 70s, when they started making Paint Your Wagon and that whole series of ludicrously overinflated, overpriced, and hopelessly out-of-date movies. There's a disconnection at the moment between the people making films and the audience, other than at the most banal level. Every now and then, someone like Spielberg or Scorsese manages to reconnect with the audience, and the audience is allowed the privilege of seeing there is some intelligence out there working. I loved Private Ryan. Not everyone did, but I absolutely loved Private Ryan. It's a very intelligent film, and it gave me, incidentally, a window into my father's generation and into my father, which in a strange way I'd been denied. A film I only saw quite recently that knocked me sideways was Field of Dreams, because again, it just hooked something into me that I needed reminding of. The filmmakers are out there, the intelligences are out there, the writers are out there, there is a community out there. What's gone wrong is the interleaving, and this is what I said when I was in Hollywood, it's what made me very unpopular, the interleaving of all these layers of lawyers, agents, advisors, who unfortunately work the angle which is, you're a great filmmaker. Do you know there's another filmmaker who's not as good as you earning more money? Now that's a a lot of filmmakers are very vulnerable to that. And a lot of filmmakers end up, I wouldn't say selling their soul, that's too crass, but end up making misjudgments and not making the films they want to make and not believing in the films that they do believe in because their confidence in their status, if you like, within the profession or within the industry is undermined. So I'm looking for and hoping for and believing there will be a kind of return to a set of priorities, proper set of priorities. Good filmmakers will earn good money if they make good movies, but you've got to get it in that order. Learn your craft, make films you can be proud of, get paid properly, and continue to make films you can be proud of. Don't worry that some other schmuck who made a chase movie or a rape movie is getting paid twice what you're getting paid, because Lord knows he's paying the price for that.
Lord Puttnam, you know that, but the major question in Hollywood and in so many other segments of parts of America is, what are you going to do for me tonight? And the question is posed in terms of what dollars are you going to make for me tonight? But we have so many more questions. We've come to the end of this program. Stay where you are, and we'll do Lord Puttnam Part 2. Thanks, David, for joining me today on The Open Mind. And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time, too. If you would like a transcript of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to The Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York, 10150. Meanwhile, as another old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the M. Weena Foundation of New Jersey, the Thomas and Teresa Malarkey Foundation, the Open Society Institute, the Center for Educational Outreach and Innovation at Teachers College, Columbia University, the William T. Grant Foundation, and from the corporate community, Rhoda Finn.